that Kathleen's here today and can share some of her knowledge around Coast Salish traditions. So welcome, Kathleen Johnnie.
I have come to Salt Spring Island so many times because there's a lot of activity on Salt Spring Island, and there's a lot of archaeological sites on Salt Spring Island. However, I started the work that I'm doing now as a lands and resources person with the Snuneymuxw First Nation. And I got to work very closely with Geraldine Manson and the elders there on Gabriola and in the Nanaimo general area. So that was really where I started to learn more about who I am as an individual. I know that you just heard I'm Penelakut. I work for the Lyackson. My mother's Lyackson. I was probably related to almost every single person at the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I always say that I had to marry a non-native person because I'm related to everyone this side of the Rockies. I learned a lot at the Snuneymuxw First Nation. A few of the rules and part of the laws are why you are here this morning instead of an evening a few weeks ago, is because it's our law. We don't speak of our ancestors. In some families, because it is a familial tradition to care for our ancestors, to care for our recently deceased and our ancestral deceased. And we have about 40 families that are still very active in that practice. So it's not one of those practices that are long ago and we just don't know about them. It's something that is very active today. And you've got pictures up there of a few of our families that are responsible. And they call themselves very humbly gravediggers. And they are so much more than that. And they are so much more important than that to us. But when they are on site and when they are taking care of our ancestors, they are the law. They are the full law, wholly. Every single person in the room does whatever they say to do, or does not do whatever they say not to do. So that's where the law starts, is in those families and in those traditions. We call them, and you're recording this, so I know that my Hulkminam people will go, okay, Kathleen, you said this wrong, but we call them Statonamat. They are our experts. They are our PhDs. They are the people that are our justices when it comes in this particular field. We have Statonamat in many different fields. We have people who know the fishing, who know the hunting, who know when it's time to pick up your house and move to another resource camp. We have our own PhDs throughout our societies. The people that care for our ancestors, those families, that law that I was talking about just a moment ago, they tell us that we're not supposed to talk about our ancestors afternoon. In some families it's afternoon, in some families it's after 3. But it doesn't matter, whichever one, you have to respect that family's tradition, and you have to go to that family, go to their laws. If they are the ones that are there taking care of our ancestors, then they are the one that has to express the law, and they are the one that the law is being expressed through. So that's one of our big laws. So that when Phil asked me about coming to speak, he asked me for an evening session, and I went, I really can't do that. I'm not allowed to. And it sounds like, it sounds like a parental thing when you hear me say I'm not allowed to do that. It's not. It was I cannot do that. If you can't make this in the morning, I cannot do it. That's my law. That's the law that I have to respect. Speaking about our ancestors, me standing here speaking about our ancestors today, I cannot be around children for 4 days after this event. I have to avoid any connection or contact with children when we speak of our ancestors. That's another law that we have. We don't bring our children to these events because of that. we're concerned that our ancestors are so powerful that they can take over or affect our children in some way. The Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, I don't handle our ancestral remains. I don't do that at all. It would be detrimental to my well-being or perhaps my children or my grandchildren's well-being if I handled our ancestors. That's a law. Only the people that call themselves grave diggers are allowed to handle our ancestral remains. We've got to the point where we say that. If our ancestors are found, then this is what we tell Archaeology Branch and these Kinder Morgan people and Port Metro Vancouver people and just about anyone. If our ancestors are found, only our cultural people can take care of them. Only our cultural people may handle them. So that's another law that we have. We also require that observers like myself, I'm an observer. To any of these events, I'm only an observer. I'm a witness to the event, but not in the same way that we have witnesses. We have witnessing. It's an important part of our culture, but it's the men that do the witnessing. The women carry the information, and I am just an observer when I am there in attendance and assisting at one of these events. Observers, we have laws for them, too. You don't ask why a cultural person is doing something. You don't interfere with them when they are doing the work when they are doing the ancestral care work. You just wait for them to come as soon as they are finished, and they will tell you what they need to tell you. But that's all you were there to do. If you are not from one of the cultural families, you do not interfere with the work. It's one of our laws. Darcy was sharing with you some of the things like the interference of putting a house or anything in and amongst the grave sites. It is a really serious issue for us. We don't want that to be happening. There is a difficulty though, because everybody wants foreshore. And that is where we took care of our ancestors, took care of our recently deceased, was along the foreshores. We'd take them to these islands, and that's where we would rest them permanently. But we always had our ancestors or our recently passed with us along these foreshores. And that's one of the difficulties that we have, and that's where the conflicts come in between the non-Halkamenim people or non-Saanich people and us, is everybody wants foreshore. Everybody wants a dock. Everybody wants, the idyllic life of living on these islands. And it is beautiful here, it really is. That's why we're here. But we would be, and I'm doing the land use planning for the Lyackson First Nation right now, and I'm taking it out to the community. We always say, no houses, nothing near these archaeological areas. And we took that to the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, and we said to them every single time, we told them, we don't want any development anywhere on or near these archaeological sites. And they said, oh, well, we have to do this. We have to create this visitor experience opportunity here in this spot. You're going to come across our ancestral remains. You're going to come across our people here. And they would go, no, we've had an archaeologist go and look, and it's all right. And every single time, they would come across our ancestors. So we finally got them to agree to do a visitor experience protocol, and they will no longer place visitor experience sites around archaeological sites, because it didn't matter. Every single time they wanted to electrify the East Point Lighthouse, because some people in Saturna wanted to create a museum out of it, and they needed it to be electrified. And we said, well, use solar, you're a park. Use solar. And they said, no, we've got to dig it through. And we went, no, don't do it. And yes, they came across ancestral remains. So it happens every single time. When there's an archaeological site there, when there's a rich archaeological site there, you will find ancestral remains there. And so we try very hard not to interfere with the lines of communication between our ancestors, because that's one of the things that Darcy was talking about. It's very powerful. We don't want you interfering with those lines of communication. There is a line of communication there. Some of those powerful people that were kept separate, they were powerful. They could have been warriors. They could have been shamans. They could have been very dangerous people to our communities. And they might have had people buried around them, farther away from them, that were there to protect the other people from those people. So we tried very hard to make sure that we worked very hard to make sure that we respect those scenarios. When Grace Islet came up, I actually responded on behalf of Lyackson First Nation, and I said we will respect whatever the Cowichan tribes or Penelakut tribe cultural people have to say about this island. And it's not because we weren't involved around this, it's just that we get close to 350 referrals a year, and ones like Kinder Morgan are something like 300 referrals in one giant referral. And a referral is basically, here we've got a project, we need you to tell us if it's going to cause difficulty for you in some way, for your First Nation in some way. So I just said, okay, no, we'll totally go with, we totally trust Cowichan tribes and their cultural people. We have all confidence in them. We totally trust Penelakut tribe and their cultural people. We have all confidence in them. If one of them or both of them is on site, we're fine with that. Well, we didn't know that they didn't actually allow them to even go on site. And then that's when we found out, we started emailing people. I said, what's going on? I hear they're starting to build and there's starting to be an uproar about this. What's going on? And that's when I found out they weren't even allowed on site. So for the First Nation, for Lyackson First Nation, I talked to my chief about it. He said, well, we have to step in. They wouldn't allow our people to be on site with the archaeologists. And that's what we always ask for. We always say you have to have a cultural person. If an archaeologist is going there, then there is a reason that archaeologist is going there. We have to have a cultural person on site, because there is no way that an archaeologist can know or learn everything about our culture without us, without having been one of these people. And these people don't teach me, because I'm not from one of those families. It's handed down in a familial manner. So they don't teach me about it. They teach me what I'm not supposed to be doing. They teach me how I am supposed to be behaving, how I'm supposed to center my mind and make sure that I've got good thoughts while I'm engaging this work with them. They teach me how they are going to protect me while I help them. So we found out that it wasn't, that none of our people had been allowed on the island. And so my chief went, that's it, we're going straight to the minister. We have to know what's going on. So we met with the deputy minister. We met with the minister himself after you see these federal BC First Nations meetings that have been going on for the last couple of years. Our First Nations cornered Minister Thompson and said, we need to talk with you while you're here. This is too important. Grace Islet is too important to us. We can't let this go. So we spent about 45 minutes with him explaining what I just shared with you. We still have 40 active people. The courts have told you that culture is central to what you have to protect. This is still a contemporary active practice that we have to protect. And so that's what we did. And it was that meeting that made him change his mind about dealing with Grace Islet. And that's what I do for the cultural people, because they're not supposed to have to deal with these stressors. They are carrying an enormous burden caring for our ancestors. That's our belief, is that they're caring for our ancestors. Our ancestors are very powerful, powerful people, especially ancestors that have been buried in this manner. They're very powerful people. And so our cultural people, our Stapelnamen, are carrying an enormous burden. And they're not supposed to be questioned. As soon as they hear ancestors calling to them to help them, and the ancestors do call to them to help them, they are supposed to be there the next day taking care of those people. And they weren't being allowed to do that. And it was causing enormous stresses to them. So that's where I step in. And that's where it's my job to go and make room for them to do theirs. That's where Chief Seymour and the Cowichan tribe stepped in and they went, enough, we're taking you to court. We told you to stop. If you won't stop, we're taking you to court. That's our job. That's the job of the technicians and the politicians. It's our job to protect these sites so that these people can do theirs without interference, without being questioned. Because that's the one thing that always happens. We get a cultural person on site and then everybody's very curious about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. And we have to step in, and the technical people have to step in and protect them from that energy, because they're supposed to be very, very centered and focused on what their tasks are, because they cannot forget one moment or one single step. Otherwise, things can go wrong in this process. And a lot of people, like a lot of people that are not used to our processes, they go, well, that's very nice, that's your belief, not mine, I'm Christian, or I'm such and such, whatever religion. This is why I'm here to tell you, these are our laws, observe them. We don't care what your religion is, it's not our belief, it's our laws, and you need to observe them the same way you would any other law that you are required to observe. So when we're on site, and our cultural people are on site, they become the law. And I'm there to protect them from... ignorance is such a hard word, and it shouldn't be, because it's just a lack of education in a certain component. And I am certainly ignorant on what it is these people are doing, even though I am Coast Salish. They won't teach me what they are doing, and they should not, because it is a very important series of directions, and you have to start fairly young to be doing this work, because there is a name for every single bone in my hand. A name for every single bone in my body, and they know every single word. So what I try to do is I try to protect our cultural people so that they can do the job they are supposed to do. This 1, 2, 3, 4th panel down, that's Laura and Augie in the bottom. Things weren't really going very smoothly for the Grace Islet project. Even after the minister bought it, they were meeting and meeting and meeting, and behind you there's the Simons, our two Simons. They're starting to get very upset because we're being invited to their meetings. Well, we just have to write this protocol. And they're being spoken to by the ancestors at Grace Islet. And the ancestors at Grace Islet are saying, what are you doing? Why are you here taking care of us? So, I just thought, okay, well, that's the political stuff, and I'm not a political person. I'm a technician. I go in, I get things done. Politics for me is such a, I don't like politics. It's just too, you're sitting there swimming in ideas and concepts, and which one is right is never works for me. I'm a technician. I give me a project, and if you want this mountain moved from here to there, then that's what I'm there to do. So I figure that stuff out. So they call me when the project doesn't get moving, when the issues aren't being addressed the way they need them to be addressed. I go in and I let them know. I said, okay, you know who I am. If I'm going in, I'm going to make them get this project moving so that you can go in and take care of our ancestors. I said, do you want to be there? Because it can get ugly when I'm doing my job. It can, I'm sorry, it does. If they tell me this is what they want, then that's what I have to do, and it can get quite rough in a room when they're asking me to move aside the political whatevers are happening. But they agreed. They said, no, we need you to go in. We need you to go in. We need you to make this happen. We need this to happen now. We can't be waiting anymore. We were supposed to be doing this 2 weeks ago. And so I went in. They said, okay, the very first meeting that I went to, I said to them, they wanted to redraft the protocol between all of the First Nations, the government in BC, and is it the Nature's Trust? Nature's Conservancy. They wanted to redraft this again, and I was just sitting there going, you want to go away and you want to come back again? Why can't we just do this in the room? Because we aren't talking about big changes. Let's just do this in the room and let's just get this protocol done. Let's get it going. And then we want to know who's going to be sitting with you when you're selecting the contractors, because those contractors, they can be in danger themselves. We've got to have people on site to protect those people. We've got to, these contractors that are coming in to do the demolition have to be protected. They have to be cared for. That's part of our law. Whoever is involved in this has to be protected, has to be cared for. So we just try to make sure that it's just a general sensibility of respect. And I don't think that anybody doesn't get that, because we respect our cemeteries. We have laws around this protection and respect of regular cemeteries. So that's really what it is. It's just respect and protect these burial sites. That's what we're looking for. That can be very difficult when people want this waterfront. In the land use planning that I'm doing for the Lyackson First Nation, one of the things we said was, well, you know, it might not be a good idea to have waterfront development. We built a couple of yurts over on Valdez Island. We put them 120 feet back away from the foreshore. The person that selected the site wanted the yurts right near the foreshore because everybody wants that. And we said, no, we don't need it there. We can put it 120 feet back, protect and preserve the trees, protect and preserve the relationship between these trees and the ocean. This is all part of why people want this area. It's because this is part of the view. This is part of the landscape. This is part of the wonderful energy of Valdez Island, is that there are trees here and there's foreshore here. And we need to maintain that connectivity between where our yurts are going to go and where the foreshore is. Again, I've mentioned that Joe Average Citizen, I don't care who you are, does not touch the ancestors. We had, again, in the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, they try to protect and preserve these sites as well. But erosion can happen, dogs playing in the park, kids playing, people don't realize what these rocks might be, or a tree blows over. One of the park staff, a Coast Salish, a Saanich person, touched our ancestral remains trying to protect them from some sort of erosion. He has slipped and cracked his head, he has fallen overboard into the water. He has had several things happen since this event. Our people were there yesterday working on him to help him and protect him from what was happening. We believe that was our ancestors telling him he had no business. He wasn't fully protected when he went in to take care of them. He needed to be protected. So we have made sure, and we have directed Parks Canada, that he needs to be protected, that he has to go through a particular ceremony to protect him from what has occurred. We have archaeologists go into the park and we direct them. We send out Laura and Augie and say, we need you to talk to these people, these archaeologists. They're students, they're going into the park, they're very excited, they think they're Indiana Jones. They want to get in there and they want to find the treasures, and They want to be, they love history, they love artifacts, but they don't know our people, and they don't know the power of our ancestors. So we asked Laura and Augie to go and provide an orientation with them. And they told this one young man who had a lot of energy, he couldn't sit still. He was constantly moving, constantly, fidgety. They actually pulled him aside and said, you have to calm down out there. You have to settle down. I just need to go for a run, he says. I just need to, I've got a lot of energy, so I go and I jog. And they said, no, don't do that while you're doing this work in the park. Don't do that. Calm yourself down. Get yourself focused. Get your mind right. And he didn't. He'd go jogging and he slipped and he cracked his head open. These are very serious issues for us. For us, this is a result of not doing what you have been instructed to do by our cultural people. For us, this is the effect, the cause and effect of not following the laws that our people laid out. It got to the point where our Halkminam people said, we're not really sure if these archaeological schools should go forward anymore, if we can't make sure that there is someone there trying to help these youth. And there were actually, every single year, we actually hired a person from Salish and a person from Halkminam to go in to the park with these people that are from the families that take care of our ancestors, to watch over. But people think that, well, I don't believe what you're saying. It's not my religion. It's not the way I deal with these things. And our cultural people, actually, frankly, in our culture entirely, not just our cultural people, our culture, we won't argue with you, because that's not Aitchqualwin. That's what we call it. Aitchqualwin means keeping your mind in a good place, coming from a good place, having yourself centered. If you meditate, it's that sense of that meditative spot where your mind and your energy and your spirit and your physical being are all aligned. That's what that Aitchqualwin is. And we won't argue. I'm not a good example of a good Coast Salish woman. I will argue. But our people, in our cultural context, will not argue. We've got a term for that, and I don't know what the term is. I don't know how to say it in the Halkminam language. But if you see an elder just shut down and just stop explaining things to you, it's because they're saying to you, okay, you know everything. You got it all handled. You have it all figured out. And I think, what do we call it in English? Like a know-it-all. So they won't argue about anything. They'll just shut down and walk away from the discussion. That's our process. So when you have somebody that does that to you, that is a Coast Salish person, that's what they're saying to you. I've had it done to me because I am who I am. It's not a good example of a Coast Salish woman, but it is who I am. So I know what it is they're saying to me. I know when they're expecting me to take up what they're trying to teach me and take up what I should be learning. So these are some of the things that are important to our people. And these are our laws and how we manage for our ancestors. We have these brilliant people who understand how to communicate, who understand how to take care of not only themselves and our ancestors, but they know how to take care of me, and they know how to take care of anyone else that may be affected by the situation. So certainly it's in our laws, it was wrong for this building to have been constructed. It was wrong for it to have been constructed in the way it was. We have people that take care of all of this kind of situation and all of our cultural measures that happen around caring for an ancestor. So I think there was one other point that you made that I sat there and I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing that I could talk a bit more about, but I can't remember what it is now. So maybe I could just take questions, or something may come to me at some point. So any? Don't be shy, because I'm not going to take offense at any questions.
What would you see going forward from here now that the house has been removed? What is the way that your laws would care?
Our laws would require that the island be closed off from people, that it not be allowed to be developed on, and that people not be walking there with their kids and their dogs. And I would never go there without one of our Stuttelnamen, and I would only go there if they said, Kathleen, I need your assistance to go there. I need your assistance to do something over there. And I would probably be like the 50th person that they'd ever consider to ask for that. I might be the first person they'd ask to get them there, but the 50th person that they'd ask to help them with whatever it is that they need to do over there, because there's a lot more qualified people than me in their cultural expertise. So, yeah, for us, the rule would be close it off. Nobody goes. That would be almost what I'd say. If you have a visual of Grace Island from wherever you are, and there is somebody on that island, we want to know. We hear that people are over there walking all the time.
Yeah.
We'd like people to not be there. Yes?
How do the laws get passed from one generation to another?
I'll give you an example that's more medicinal. I have, my sister's married into a family. The mother in that family was a medicine woman. She hands down that information to her children, and depending on whether or not it's male or female, there are some traditions that have to be handed down in the male side, and some that are handed down in the female, and there are some that can be either or. So I was always fascinated by herbs and learning the medicines that were whatever was around me, all of the stuff that was on the ground, and she wouldn't teach me because I wasn't in her family. So, but she would teach my sister. She'd tell my sister what she needed, and she'd get my sister to help because my sister married into her family. So it's basically handed down from one generation to the other, and they're handed down in a way that it's on-the-job training. You're living in that person's household on a daily basis. You're being taught something. And any of our Stuttelnamen, any of our knowledgeable people, or any of our PhDs, that's what they do, is they start handing down information. If you're in that family, they start handing it down, and you're just constantly in learning mode. Anything else?
I'm just wondering, the white people have rules about how to deal with dead people that sort of must have overridden your cultural practices, and so there would have been a time when suddenly you had to stop what you were doing, the dead, and switch.
Yes, definitely. There was a big switch because cemeteries were designated in the European context, and that's not necessarily how we held them. A lot of these burial islets are nothing but rock, and I've had people calling me up saying, I'm up here in Campbell River and I need help because somebody's telling me that, I've got a burial site where I'm at, because I don't understand how that could be, because it's nothing but rock. There's nothing else here but rock. And we say, that's where our people are. So it's difficult for people to understand that, and cemeteries now are the way that we are required to handle our recently deceased, and cemeteries or whatever else, like cremation or things like that, we're allowed to do those things, but it's definitely very different from what they described to us used to happen. Because Darcy mentioned a really long process. It was a really long process. Somebody would be caring for that deceased person for years and years. possibly, 4 years or more. And in regular physical contact with that person. So it's not something that is allowed to be done anymore. Sorry, I know you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I guess this is maybe a strange question, but over the course of the time that people were working to protect Grace Island, there were, I don't know how many people, does anybody else have any idea how many people were actually going out there and going around the island? And both First Nations and settlers. And does this put all those people at risk when they went on the island and when they were walking over to the island and when they were going around the island? Like, it's just an interesting concept to me. Like, I totally respect, the beliefs, but there was a lot of people involved in that. And it's,
Well, yes, our Stuffle would say yes, and that there should be a brushing off, because after the contractors were done, that is what they did. They had a brushing off ceremony. So if there were people regularly in contact with that island, and with the intensive protective energy of focused on trying to protect the island, then yes, there probably should be a brushing off. I'm not going to say that it happened in the Longhouse, but the Longhouse was a part of that protective energy that was happening, especially the people that were stood up in the center of the floor. So there definitely, that is something that we'll be meeting on Grace Island, and I'll mention that. Thank you very much, because we were so intent on protecting the island, we never really thought about that aspect, but definitely that is something that we ought to be taking care of. So I hugely appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I really appreciate your talk. It was very inspiring. I grew up in one of the Salish communities, a mixed race family, and we had elders who trained us at a time when I think you could call it almost an era of desecration. So there was a great sense of defined grave sites that were still being desecrated, and a great deal of concern around it. Today people are a lot more sensitive, but they're more sophisticated, like with the Grace Island case, all the different phases where the guy kept desecrating and trying to avoid it. I'm going to give you two borderline examples of sites where nearby are formal archaeological sites identified. But how far those sites extend, and what do you do when you encounter what's probably potentially remains? Wild area on the west coast of Salt Spring. We would stash our field equipment, and we started seeing bones coming up from on the side of a 100-year-old fir tree, and of course we freed. So I guess my question is, I'm going to give you these two examples and ask your advice on what's kind of best practices for today. So we just left that site alone, but we noticed there were bones coming out of the ground. We didn't want to touch them or do anything. We did kind of move some branches on top. That was it. Second one is kind of a funny one. Pile of rocks near our house. We're building a rock garden. And we're freaked that it might be a cairn. So we left it alone until one day we noticed that there was a piece of concrete, on these piles, and we started gingerly taking outer rocks because we assumed that it was just a pile of junk. Any ideas on these borderline sites? It's great when somebody's identified a site on a map, we can have access to that information in certain situations, but there's a lot of places where people on this island would do what's necessary, or would avoid the site if necessary, if they kind of knew, and we don't know all this.
Yeah. Well, there are technical people like me in almost every First Nation now, where we can give you, or we'll take the information, like in the situation of the tree, we would take that information and then we'd refer it to well, we refer it to an archaeologist and to one of our stuff and say, we need somebody to go over and take a look at this site. And I'm sorry, but it'd be cheaper if you got a stuff there. An archaeologist first. But it's just to identify what's going on at the site to confirm whether or not they're human remains. And generally also, they do want you to check it in with the RCMP when there are human remains found. But when we have about a half a dozen docks being applied for on the island. I'm probably next week going to phone one of the dock contractors to ask him to take me around to some of the sites. And this is what we have said to BC and to these contractors, you should get a cultural person to go and walk the site and identify whether or not it is a sensitive area to be building a dock. And then you can bring in an archaeologist to do the proper AIA, archaeological investigation, or site alteration permit process. But that is what we suggest that they do, is that you get a cultural person, notify a cultural person from one of the communities. If you know someone at Salish, if you know Cowichan Tribes, Diane Hinckley at Cowichan Tribes, she is one of the people that I contact as soon as I hear that there are found ancestral remains. I call Robert Sam at Penellicut and let him know I've heard of found ancestral remains, or potential, like I can even say that there's bones, they found bones, but they don't know if they're human or animal. Somebody needs to go and investigate. But generally have the archaeologists and the cultural people work hand in hand. And we try to make that happen. That's what we try to do. We have an agreement with Arc Branch that we'll get archaeological inspection permits so that we can review the permit. And usually our responses are the same. Only our cultural people can handle our ancestors. Please have some brand new blankets on site in case you have found our ancestors. But the archaeologists and our cultural people usually work together in the protection of the site. Sometimes it's just easier to get a cultural person, or less costly to get a cultural person over on site to be able to do the initial assessment. And then they will likely call whichever archaeologist they're fond of working with, and then hook you up. But that's what we tell BC. We know that they don't think that our cultural people are PhDs. They don't think that, but we know that they can do a good ground investigation about a site. And that is the other half of it, is that they will tell me this site is too important for it to be developed. Kathleen, now you have to go in there and do that. You have to go in and protect the site from development. That is the drawback with having a Statonomic come on site, is that their focus is what is the cultural features about the site and what is the importance of that cultural feature to them. But that's generally what I would do, and you see it in the newspapers all the time. RCMP have been called because bones have been found. So the RCMP here might be something to, because they change, and you were just talking about educating archaeologists on some of these cairns and other burial features. It's a good idea to regularly do that with the RCMP too, is to make sure, because they don't often know. They see human remains and they think their mind goes totally somewhere else.
In my experience, they collect the bones and then send them to the coroner, and now they will disturb the burial.
Yeah, but we'd prefer cultural person and archaeologists being called.
In terms of the education component, would you be the type of person that would do that, or would you expect that a grave worker would be the better person?
We'd ask our cultural people, Laura and Augie, or one of the Simons, or all four of them, to meet with the RCMP, and to have people like Darcy or Eric McClay around to have that discussion with them. Yeah, because we don't want the RCMP collecting the bones and shipping them off to a coroner. There's an important aspect to that it just amazes me how small a fragment of human bone a cultural person can identify, that my eyes would totally glaze over. I had Westpac Liquid Natural Gas just tell me the other day that we don't think we need your cultural people on site because we've given our crew some training in how to identify ancestral remains. And I was sitting there like I can't even do this. And I've been doing this for 18 years. And some of those ancestral remains are tiny fragments. And it's just not right to say that you're giving a guy a one-day session and he's going to get it. So yeah, we'd have Darcy and Eric and some of our Stuttelnomit there and just have a sit-down chat with them. And then one of the recommendations we'd want to make to them is that they have that, if they have a new person coming on, that new person needs to be trained in what the protocol is. So that is something that we ought to do as well. So I really appreciate that. I'll take that back and that question because we ought to be training the people who will be notified. But definitely we'd like an archaeologist and our cultural person. Our cultural people will identify whatever archaeologists they like to work with. And it's better to keep it that way because there are some archaeologists that really consider it just an exercise in picking up this archaeological site and recording it and moving it to a museum. And that's not what we want here. Our biggest, what we're always saying to BC and to local governments is we want our archaeological record to be retained on site where it is undisturbed. Was there? Yes.
Just in regard to the cultural law aspect, recognizing that we're visitors to this territory, we have the settlers calling this law of the land, but that's been overlaid on a previous law of the land. My question just is in regard to education of the next generations, like within the school system in BC, and is there any movement or is there some way that we can, because here for the most part, most of the people have at least a smidge of knowledge of the area's laws, and so it would seem to me that going down the road, it's going to be the younger people who are going to be out and about in these islets discovering these things, and I'm just wondering how do we make sure that that's understood, that there's a law here previous.
It's a really good question, and it is something that I took up with the ministers when we had the BC First Nations chiefs and the BC cabinet ministers meetings. They want to educate Canadians about the residential school system and the whole process, as well as the proper history of colonialism in Canada. And I said that's really good, and you should do that. But you should also talk about, you should be also celebrating the First Nations that are in your community. And this was really unfortunate. I went to Hawaii on holiday, and everybody there thinks of Hawaiian, even the Hawaiians start talking to me in Hawaiian. and I had one woman come up to me and say, "Oh, I just love your culture here. It's absolutely beautiful. I just wish our BC Indians were just like you." To Hawaii to get discriminated against. And I said to the minister, and I shared that story with him, and I said, I just wish people knew our culture a little bit more and who we are as a people a lot more so that they could celebrate the rich wealth of culture in their backyard. And it's difficult, I have to say that, because, and then Lyackson, the one with the green band in his hat, will say, we had to protect our culture, so we brought it underground. Otherwise it would have died, because it was outlawed. So, it's difficult now to bring it out again, because our people are very fearful. And frankly, this whole thing about the Syrian refugees is, you just sit there and go, bring our culture out, and these are just people that need a hand. So How would we want to bring it out? Although there are a lot of First Nations around the province that do share their culture very openly, and you know, it's just a place where the Statonamet, who are in charge of sharing our culture, they have to get to a comfort level of being able to share. And I recognize that, but you know, it's one of those things that I have said and I hope the ministers were listening, because I'm sure they were quite shocked that I would go to Hawaii and be discriminated against in Hawaii. But that was one of the things that I hope they will change, that I hope will come out, is that, you know, people need to understand this simple gesture. Like, it's a really powerful, powerful gesture. The women, that's one of our responsibilities, it's one of our laws. The women walk around the longhouse and we make acknowledgement and thank you for your presence and for witnessing the work that was done that day. And this is, we say it means thank you, we say Haichka means thank you, but it's an acknowledgement of every single one of you who have taken time out of your life to come and see this event today. And thank you very much for doing that. I actually have to close this discussion down right now, so I could probably take one more quick question.